Okay, so welcome back, and now we're going to talk about decimal fractions. So a lot of cases it is a lot easier to work with decimals than it is with fractions. And so it's going to be important to be able to convert a fraction into its decimal equivalent. And so the way we do that is exactly just by using division, right? Because remember, the fractional bar represents division. So when we want to change the fraction, or whatever fraction we have, into a decimal equivalent, all we're going to do is divide the numerator by the denominator. So for example, if we have 5/8, right? So if we have 5/8, we can write this as a decimal just by taking the division, right? And just writing this as this and then going through the process. Now, if we go through the division process, the division algorithm, to write it as a decimal, we keep going until one of two things happen. Either we're going to end up down the road or down the line, as we're going through the division algorithm and going through those 4 steps and repeating it over and over again, we're going to keep going until we either get a 0 as a remainder, and once we get a 0, we're done, okay? And then we just fill in any missing zeros for placeholders if necessary. Or we're going to start to see a repeated pattern, okay? So if we get 0, then that's called a terminating decimal, okay? That means we stop. And the decimal, what we say, terminates. So a terminating decimal is any decimal or a fraction that we're converting to decimal where the decimal stops. Okay, so that's a terminating. Now in the other case, just to kind of wrap this up, if we get a pattern, let's say a repeated pattern as we're going through the division algorithm and we're going through those 4 steps, repeating those 4 steps, if we notice that a pattern starts to emerge, then we call that a repeating decimal. Okay, we'll talk about how to handle those as well. And then the third thing is a non-repeating decimal. So that's where we end up with like an irrational number, okay, where there's no pattern and the decimal doesn't terminate. That's a non-repeating decimal. So things like pi, right? Pi is an irrational number. Okay, E is an irrational number. Okay, so there are numbers out there that don't repeat. So fractions that, we can't, right? In fact, all fractions, by the way, will fall into one of those 2 categories. Either it will be a terminating decimal or it will turn into a repeating decimal, okay? All fractions will fall into one of those 2 groups, okay? So keep that in mind as well, okay? If it's an irrational number, then you can't write it as a fraction anyway, because only rational numbers can be written as fractions, okay? So with that being said, I'll come back and we'll do some examples.